The sun beat down mercilessly on the small town of Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, 1876, as Katherine Blackwell stood defiantly in the town square, her auburn hair blazing like fire in the afternoon light. The crowd around her had fallen silent, shocked by the words that had just left her lips, words condemning the town's most powerful man of corruption and murder. As the final syllable hung in the air, she knew immediately she had made a terrible mistake. "You'll regret those words, Miss Blackwell," Maxwell Thornton snarled, his face contorted with rage as he signaled to his men. "No woman speaks to me that way in my town." Katherine's chin remained high despite the tremor of fear that coursed through her body. At 22, she had grown accustomed to fighting her own battles since her father's death 2 years prior. As the owner of the town's only newspaper, she considered it her duty to print the truth, regardless of who it offended. "It's not slander if it's true, Mr. Thornton," she replied, her voice steady despite the dangerous situation she found herself in. "I have evidence of what you've done." The crowd parted as two of Thornton's hired guns moved toward her. Katherine took a step back, but there was nowhere to run. The strong hands of the men gripped her arms, and no one in the crowd dared intervene. "Take her to the old mining shack," Thornton ordered. "Perhaps some time alone will teach her the value of a woman's silence." Katherine struggled against her captors, but it was futile. As they dragged her away, she caught sight of a stranger watching from the edge of the crowd, a tall man with a weathered face, a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Katherine felt a strange flutter in her chest before she was roughly pulled away. 20 miles outside of town, Weston Zachariah pulled his horse to a stop at the ridge overlooking Redemption Creek. At 30, he had spent more than a decade drifting through the territories, working as a ranch hand, occasional bounty hunter, and whatever else kept him fed and his horse saddled. His latest job had brought him to this remote corner of the Arizona Territory, tracking a fugitive who had allegedly fled in this direction. Weston adjusted his hat against the glaring sun and patted his horse's neck. "What do you think, Drifter? Reckon we'll find trouble or just dust in this town?" The chestnut gelding snorted in response, pawing at the ground impatiently. "Yeah, I'm thinking the same," Weston murmured, his voice carrying the slight hint of a Texas drawl. "Let's see what Redemption Creek has to offer." As he rode into town, Weston's experienced eyes took in every detail: the saloon bustling with activity despite the early hour, the general store with its weathered sign, and the small building with Redemption Creek Chronicle painted across its front. But what caught his attention most was the commotion in the town square. Weston dismounted, tying Drifter to a hitching post before making his way toward the gathering. He arrived just in time to see a young woman with fiery hair being confronted by a well-dressed man flanked by gunmen. Keeping to the edge of the crowd, he watched the scene unfold, his hand instinctively resting near his holstered Colt revolver. The woman's words carried clearly through the air: accusations of corruption, of land stolen from settlers, of a man found dead after threatening to expose the truth. Bold words, especially from a woman in a town that clearly belonged to the man she was accusing. When the men seized her, Weston tensed. His job was to find a fugitive, not to involve himself in local disputes. But something about the woman's courage struck him, and when her eyes met his just before she was dragged away, he felt an unexpected sense of responsibility. As the crowd dispersed, Weston approached an elderly man who had been watching the scene with evident distress. "Excuse me," Weston said, tipping his hat politely. "I'm new to these parts. Mind telling me what that was all about?" The old man glanced nervously toward the direction where the woman had been taken, then back at Thornton, who was now striding toward the saloon. "That there was Katherine Blackwell, runs the local paper," the old man explained in a hushed voice. "Got a streak of her father in her, never did know when to stay quiet, and that man she crossed is Maxwell Thornton, owns half the county and aims to own the rest. And where are they taking her?" Weston asked, his voice deliberately casual. "Old mining shack up in Devil's Canyon," the old man replied, shaking his head. Thornton uses it to teach lessons to those who cross him. Some folks never come back the same, if they come back at all. Weston's jaw tightened. Is there a lawman in this town? The old man gave a bitter laugh. Sheriff Jenkins might as well be wearing Thornton's brand, won't lift a finger against him. Nodding his thanks, Weston returned to his horse. His fugitive could wait. Something told him Katherine Blackwell might not have that luxury. Katherine's head throbbed where it had struck the wall of the shack when she was thrown inside. The door had slammed shut, followed by the ominous sound of a heavy beam being dropped into place, sealing her in. The mining shack was little more than a crude shelter, 4 walls of rough-hewn timber with gaps between the planks, a dirt floor, and a roof that leaked in several places. A single narrow window, covered with rusted bars, provided the only light aside from what filtered through the cracks in the walls. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pain in her ribs where one of Thornton's men had struck her when she continued to resist. The interior of the shack was barren except for a straw pallet in one corner and a bucket of stagnant water. "Hello," she called out, knowing it was futile. "Is anyone there?" Only silence answered her. Katherine moved to the window, peering through the bars. The shack stood in a small clearing surrounded by rocky terrain and scrub brush. Devil's Canyon, they called this place, a fitting name for what amounted to Thornton's private prison. She rattled the bars, testing their strength, but they were firmly embedded in the frame. Next, she examined the door, solid oak planks reinforced with iron bands. Even if she had tools, breaking through would take more strength than she possessed. Katherine sank down onto the pallet, her mind racing. How long did Thornton intend to keep her here? Days, weeks. Until she agreed to retract her accusations and print an apology in her newspaper. Or did he have something worse in mind? She thought of the evidence hidden in her office documents proving Thornton had forged land deeds, witness statements about the murder of a homesteader who refused to sell his claim. If only she had published it all instead of confronting him first. As the afternoon heat intensified, turning the shack into an oven, Katherine tried to conserve her energy and the meager water supply. She wouldn't give Thornton the satisfaction of breaking her. Somehow she would find a way out. She had to. Weston rode hard toward Devil's Canyon, following directions gleaned from reluctant townsfolk. Few were willing to speak openly against Thornton, but Weston had ways of persuading people when necessary. The canyon was isolated, a maze of narrow passages and steep walls that had once been mined for silver before the veins ran dry. The sun was beginning to set when he spotted the shack, perched on a small plateau halfway up the canyon wall. From his vantage point, he could see 2 men stationed outside guards Thornton had left to ensure his prisoner remained secure. Weston dismounted, tethering Drifter to a scrub oak where the horse would be hidden from view. He checked his revolver, ensuring all 6 chambers were loaded, then slipped a hunting knife into his boot. Direct confrontation would be risky. He needed a distraction. Moving silently through the growing shadows, Weston circled around to approach the shack from above. Years of tracking and hunting had taught him patience and stealth. As he drew closer, he could hear the guards talking. "How long you reckon the boss wants her kept here?" one asked, lighting a cigarette. "Long enough to teach her a lesson," the other replied with a chuckle that made Weston's blood boil. "Few days without food in this heat, she'll be begging to take back everything she said." "Shame to waste such a pretty thing," the first guard commented. "Maybe we should check on her, make sure she's comfortable." "Boss said not to touch her." "Yet," the second guard warned, but he didn't say nothing about looking. Weston had heard enough. He picked up a rock and hurled it into the brush several yards away. The sound immediately caught the guard's attention. "What was that?" one of them said, drawing his gun. "Probably just a coyote," the other replied, but he too had his hand on his weapon. "Go check it out anyway." As one guard moved toward the sound, Weston circled back, approaching the remaining guard from behind. In one swift motion, he clamped a hand over the man's mouth and pressed the barrel of his revolver against his temple. "Make a sound, and it'll be your last," Weston whispered. "Not if you understand," the guard nodded frantically. Good, now how many people know the woman is here? Just us and the boss, the guard muttered when Weston slightly relaxed his grip. And his right-hand man, Cooper, keys to the shack, in my pocket. Weston retrieved the keys, then struck the guard with the butt of his revolver, rendering him unconscious. He quickly bound and gagged the man, then concealed himself again, waiting for the second guard to return. When the man emerged from the brush, finding his companion missing, he called out, "Frank, where'd you go?" Weston stepped out, his revolver aimed steadily. Looking for your friend, the guard's hand moved toward his gun, but Weston was faster. "I wouldn't," he warned. "Unless you're eager to meet your maker." "Who the hell are you?" the guard demanded. "Someone who doesn't appreciate men who lock up women," Weston replied coldly. "Now, hands up and turn around." The guard hesitated, then made his decision the wrong one. His hand flew to his holster, but before he could draw, Weston fired. The shot echoed through the canyon as the guard fell, clutching his shoulder. Weston quickly disarmed the wounded man and secured him alongside his unconscious partner. Neither would be a threat for a while, but he knew he needed to move quickly. The sound of the gunshot might attract attention. Approaching the shack, Weston called out, "Miss Blackwell, are you in there?" Katherine had been dozing fitfully when the gunshot jolted her awake. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding, uncertain whether the sound represented danger or hope. "Miss Blackwell," a man's voice called, deep and unfamiliar. She moved cautiously to the door. "Who's there?" "Name's Weston Zachariah. I'm here to help you." Katherine hesitated, remembering the stranger she'd seen in the crowd. "How do I know you're not one of Thornton's men? If I was, would I be asking permission to enter?" There was a hint of wry humor in his voice. "I've got the keys, but I can leave them here and find another way to get you out if you prefer not to trust me." Something in his tone reassured her. "No, please, get me out of here." She heard the key turn in the lock and then the heavy beam being lifted away. The door swung open, and Katherine found herself face to face with the man she'd glimpsed in town, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a summer storm and several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and a revolver hung at his hip. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over her with concern. Katherine touched the bruise forming on her cheekbone. "Nothing serious, did you? The guards?" "They're indisposed," Weston replied, glancing back over his shoulder. "But we need to move." This isn't the kind of hospitality that comes with a long invitation. Katherine didn't need to be told twice. She stepped out of the shack, inhaling deeply of the fresh air. Twilight had fallen, casting long shadows across the canyon. "My horse is this way," Weston said, offering his hand to help her navigate the rocky slope. "We need to put some distance between us and this place before Thornton realizes his men have failed." Katherine took his hand, feeling the strength and calluses that spoke of a life of hard work. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Weston's eyes met hers briefly. "Let's just say I've got a problem with bullies who think they can silence the truth. Besides, seemed like you were the only one in that town with the courage to stand up to Thornton." As they reached his horse, Weston untied the reins. "Can you ride?" "Since I was 6, Katherine replied, allowing him to help her into the saddle before he swung up behind her. The closeness was intimate in a way that would have been scandalous in town, but out here with danger at their heels, such concerns seemed trivial. Katherine was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. "Where are we going?" she asked as the horse began picking its way down the canyon. "I've got a camp set up a few miles from here," Weston answered, his breath warm against her ear. "We'll rest there tonight and figure out our next move come morning." As they rode away from the shack that had been her prison, Katherine felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at her escape, fear of Thornton's retribution, and a strange, unexpected flutter whenever Weston's arms tightened around her to steady her on the horse. Darkness had fully descended by the time they reached Weston's camp, a small clearing beside a narrow stream sheltered by cottonwood trees. He had already set up a lean-to and a small fire pit, though the fire was cold. Weston dismounted first, then reached up to help Katherine down. Her legs were stiff from the ride and the hours confined in the shack, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Weston's hands steadied her, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "You should drink," he said, retrieving a canteen from his saddlebag. "And I've got some jerky and hardtack, not much of a feast, but it'll keep you going." Katherine accepted the canteen gratefully, taking several long swallows of the cool water. "Thank you," she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, "for all of this. I'm not sure how much longer I would have lasted in that place." Weston busied himself with tending to his horse. No need for thanks, couldn't just ride away knowing what was happening. Still, most men would have. Katherine watched him as he removed the saddle from his horse and began rubbing the animal down. There was a quiet competence to his movements that she found reassuring. "You're not from Redemption Creek. What brings you to these parts?" Weston hesitated, as if weighing how much to share. "I'm tracking someone a man wanted for robbery and murder in Texas. Trail led me here." "You're a lawman?" Katherine asked, surprised. "Bounty hunter," he corrected, meeting her gaze evenly, as if expecting judgment. Katherine nodded, understanding better now. "And instead of pursuing your quarry, you risked your life to help a stranger." A slight smile curved his lips. "Well, my quarry isn't going anywhere for the moment, and some things are more important than money." As Weston built a small fire, careful to keep it low enough not to be visible from a distance, Katherine told him about the evidence she had gathered against Thornton, the forged deeds, the threats against farmers and ranchers who refused to sell their land, the mysterious death of a man who had sworn to expose him. "I was going to publish everything in the Chronicle," she explained, accepting the strip of jerky Weston offered, "but I confronted him first. Thought perhaps he might confess if he knew I had proof. It was foolish." "Brave," Weston countered, "if a bit reckless. What made you take him on?" "Most newspaper editors I've known prefer to stay on the good side of powerful men." Katherine's expression grew distant. "My father founded the Chronicle. He believed a newspaper should serve the truth, not power. When he died, I promised to uphold that principle." She paused, adding more softly, "And Thornton had my father killed, though I can't prove it yet." Weston's eyes sharpened. "That's a serious accusation." "My father was investigating Thornton's land deals when he supposedly fell from his horse and broke his neck," Katherine said bitterly. "He was the best horseman I knew and had ridden that trail 1,000 times." They fell silent for a moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. "Get some rest," Weston finally said, gesturing to the lean-to. "I'll keep watch. Tomorrow we need to figure out how to retrieve your evidence and deal with Thornton." Katherine wanted to protest that she wasn't tired, but the events of the day had taken their toll. She crawled into the lean-to, using Weston's rolled-up blanket as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as her mind raced with thoughts of Thornton, her newspaper, and the stranger who had come to her rescue. She watched Weston through half-closed eyes as he sat by the fire, his profile strong in the flickering light. Who was this man who had risked himself for her? And what would happen when morning came? Weston kept vigilant watch as the night deepened, occasionally adding small branches to the fire to keep it burning low. His thoughts kept returning to the woman sleeping a few feet away. Katherine Blackwell was unlike any woman he had encountered in his travels, fierce and determined, willing to stand alone against corruption. She reminded him of his younger sister, Emma, who had shown the same spirit before consumption took her 5 years ago. Perhaps that was why he had felt compelled to intervene. Despite his usual policy of avoiding entanglements that didn't involve a bounty, as dawn approached, Weston finally allowed himself a brief rest, leaning back against a tree trunk but keeping his hand near his revolver. His sleep was light, and he woke fully at the first birdsong, instantly alert. Katherine was still sleeping, her auburn hair spread across his blanket, her face softened in repose. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, and anger stirred in Weston's chest at the sight of it. He had encountered many cruel men in his line of work, but those who used their power to abuse others particularly rankled him. He stirred the fire back to life and set coffee to brew in a small pot. The aroma soon filled the clearing, and he wasn't surprised when Katherine stirred and sat up, blinking in the early morning light. "Morning," he greeted her, pouring a cup of the strong brew and offering it to her. Katherine accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I haven't had coffee since yesterday morning." "How are you feeling?" Weston asked, noting the careful way she moved, favoring her bruised ribs. "I'll survive," she replied with a determined lift of her chin. "What's our plan?" Weston appreciated her directness. "First, we need to retrieve your evidence. Where exactly is it?" "Hidden in a compartment beneath the floorboards in my office at the Chronicle," Katherine explained. "But Thornton will have men watching the place by now." "Likely," Weston agreed, "but they'll be looking for you, not me." "I could go into town, claim to be a traveler interested in placing an advertisement." Katherine shook her head. "Thornton's men saw you in town yesterday. They'll remember you." "Fair point," Weston conceded. "Is there someone in town you trust, someone who could retrieve the documents for us?" Katherine considered this. "Sarah Miller, the schoolteacher, she boards with me and helps with the paper sometimes. She has a key to the office and knows about the hidden compartment, but I wouldn't want to put her in danger." "Sometimes danger finds us whether we want it or not," Weston said quietly. "But we'll try to minimize the risk. Is there a way to get a message to her without going into town?" "She walks to the schoolhouse every morning along the creek path," Katherine said. "It's about a mile outside of town." Weston nodded, a plan forming. "Then that's where we'll intercept her. After we have the evidence, we need to get it to someone with the authority to act on it, someone beyond Thornton's reach." "The territorial marshal," Katherine suggested. "His office is in Tucson, about 3 days' ride from here. Thornton has influence, but not that far." 3 days gives Thornton plenty of time to find us," Weston warned, "and Drifter can't carry double that distance at any speed." "We could get another horse in Miller's Crossing," Katherine suggested. "It's a small settlement about 10 miles west of here. Thornton has less influence there." Weston studied her with newfound respect. Despite her ordeal, her mind was sharp, focused on solutions rather than dwelling on the danger. "You've got grit, Miss Blackwell," he said with a slight smile. "Katherine," she corrected him. "I think you've earned the right to use my given name after breaking me out of Thornton's prison." "Katherine," he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. "And I'm Weston to my friends, which are few, but I'd count you among them now." A faint blush colored her cheeks, visible even beneath the bruise. "Well, Weston, shall we go meet Sarah and set our plan in motion?" They doused the fire and packed up the camp efficiently. Weston helped Katherine onto Drifter's back before mounting behind her, trying to ignore the subtle scent of her hair as the wind blew it back against his chest. This was not the time for distractions, no matter how pleasant. As they rode toward the creek path where they hoped to intercept the schoolteacher, Weston remained vigilant, aware that Thornton's men could be searching for them. But the morning remained quiet, with only the occasional cry of a hawk overhead breaking the silence. "Tell me more about this evidence you've gathered," Weston said as they rode. "What exactly does it prove?" Katherine's voice grew animated as she detailed her investigation. "Land records showing Thornton claimed properties that rightfully belonged to settlers with prior claims. Witness statements about threats made against those who wouldn't sell. And most damning, a letter from Thomas Mercer, the man who died, stating that if anything happened to him, Thornton was responsible. And you've been gathering this for how long?" "Since my father died 2 years ago," Katherine replied. "At first, it was just suspicion, but then I started noticing patterns in the land sales, areas where Thornton seemed particularly interested. There's a plan for a railroad spur coming through the territory, and Thornton has been buying up all the land along the proposed route." Weston whistled softly. "That would explain his urgency. Railroad land can increase in value tenfold overnight." "Exactly. And those who won't sell have been facing mysterious accidents, livestock dying, wells suddenly going dry." Katherine's voice hardened. "People are afraid, but they're also desperate. Someone had to speak up." "And that someone was you," Weston observed. "Your father would be proud." Katherine fell silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, if one newspaper can really make a difference against someone like Thornton. One voice speaking truth can inspire others to find their courage, Weston said. I've seen it happen. They reached the creek path and dismounted, concealing themselves and the horse in a small copse of trees where they could observe without being seen. The morning was advancing, and soon they spotted a slender young woman walking briskly along the path, a satchel of books in her hand. That's Sarah, Katherine whispered, starting to rise. Weston placed a restraining hand on her arm. Wait, let me make sure she's alone. After a careful scan of the surroundings revealed no signs of anyone following the schoolteacher, Weston nodded. Katherine stepped out onto the path, calling softly, Sarah. The young woman startled, then her face lit up with relief and concern. Katherine, oh my goodness, are you all right? Everyone's saying Thornton had you locked up, the women embraced, and Sarah pulled back to examine Katherine's bruised face. That monster, what happened? How did you escape? I had help, Katherine said, gesturing toward Weston, who had emerged from the trees, leading Drifter. Sarah, this is Weston Zachariah. Weston, my friend Sarah Miller. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the tall stranger with his well-worn clothes and the revolver at his hip. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Zachariah, and thank you for helping Katherine. Weston tipped his hat. Madam. Katherine quickly explained their plan and what they needed Sarah to do. The schoolteacher listened intently, her initial apprehension giving way to determination. Of course I'll help, she said when Katherine finished. Those documents need to reach the marshal. And Katherine, you can't go back to town. Thornton's men are everywhere, asking questions, threatening anyone they think might know where you are. Has he been to the Chronicle office? Katherine asked anxiously. Yesterday evening, Sarah confirmed, tore the place apart looking for something. But they won't find what you've hidden. Katherine's relief was palpable. When can you get the documents? After school lets out at 4, Sarah said. It would look suspicious if I went there now. Where shall I bring them? The old Wilkins cabin by North Fork, Katherine suggested. Do you know it? Sarah nodded. I'll be there by sunset, but be careful. Thornton has offered a reward for information on your whereabouts. After Sarah continued on her way to the schoolhouse, Weston and Katherine returned to Drifter. North Fork is near Miller's Crossing, Katherine explained as they mounted. We can get the evidence from Sarah and then find you another horse in one trip. And until then, Weston asked, Thornton's men will be searching every trail and road. I know a place, Katherine said. An abandoned homestead where my father and I used to stop sometimes when we rode out to interview settlers for the paper. It's secluded, and I doubt anyone else knows about it. The homestead proved to be a small, dilapidated cabin nestled in a hollow surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided natural concealment. The roof had partially collapsed, but one room remained intact enough to provide shelter. Not exactly the Grand Hotel, Katherine said with a small smile as they dismounted, but it should keep us hidden until it's time to meet Sarah. Weston unsaddled Drifter and led the horse to a small spring bubbling up behind the cabin. How far are we from this North Fork meeting place? About 3 hours' ride, Katherine replied, pushing open the cabin door. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through the gaps in the walls. We have time. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished with an old table, a single chair with a broken back, and the remains of a bed frame. Katherine began clearing away cobwebs and debris, making the space more habitable. Weston returned from tending to his horse and helped her, working in companionable silence for a while. As they worked, he found himself watching her more than he should, noting the determined set of her jaw, the grace with which she moved despite her injuries. You mentioned you've been running the newspaper for 2 years, he said finally, breaking the silence. That's a big responsibility for someone so young. Katherine paused in her cleaning. I'm 22, hardly a child, and the Chronicle was my inheritance, the only thing my father left me besides his conviction that the truth matters. I didn't mean any offense, Weston said quickly. It's admirable what you're doing. Most women your age would be focused on finding a husband, not taking on corrupt businessmen. Katherine's smile held a hint of mischief. and most men your age would be settled with a family, not chasing bounties across the territories. We each choose our own path, don't we? Weston chuckled, conceding the point. Fair enough. Although in my case it was more that the path chose me. After the war, there weren't many options for a man with my particular skills. You fought in the war? Katherine asked, her expression softening. Weston nodded, his face growing more solemn. Union cavalry, enlisted at 17, saw things no boy should see. After it ended, I tried ranching for a while, but it didn't take. Too restless, I suppose. And bounty hunting satisfies that restlessness. There was no judgment in her tone, only genuine curiosity. It pays the bills, Weston replied with a shrug. And occasionally it allows me to bring some justice to those who deserve it. He glanced at her. What about you? No suitors lining up at the Chronicle office door. Katherine laughed, a surprisingly light sound given their circumstances. Hardly. Most men in Redemption Creek find a woman with opinions, especially one who prints them rather intimidating. And those who aren't intimidated tend to be unsuitable in other ways. Their loss, Weston said, the words slipping out before he could consider them. Their eyes met across the small room, and something unspoken passed between them, a spark of connection that neither had anticipated. Katherine was the first to look away, a flush rising to her cheeks. We should rest while we can, she said, moving toward the remains of the bed frame. It's going to be a long night. Weston nodded, recognizing her need to restore some distance between them. I'll keep watch, you sleep first. Katherine hesitated, then settled onto the makeshift bed they had prepared from Weston's blanket. Wake me in a few hours so you can rest too. But even after Katherine's breathing had deepened into sleep, Weston found himself unable to rest. Instead, he sat by the cabin's single window, watching the sun arc across the sky and contemplating the unexpected turn his journey had taken. He had come to this territory tracking a fugitive, hoping for a quick capture and the bounty that would keep him going for a few more months. Instead, he had found himself embroiled in a dangerous fight against a powerful man, all because of a woman with fire in her hair and courage in her heart. More troubling still were the feelings stirring within him, feelings he had thought long buried after Emma's death and his subsequent years of solitary wandering. Attachment was a luxury a bounty hunter couldn't afford, not with the constant movement and danger that defined his life. And yet, as he watched Katherine sleeping peacefully despite the bruises marring her skin, Weston couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. It wasn't just admiration for her bravery or respect for her principles. It was something deeper, more primal, a recognition of a kindred spirit, perhaps. Katherine stirred in her sleep, a small furrow appearing between her brows as if her dreams were troubled. Without thinking, Weston moved to her side, gently smoothing her hair back from her face. The furrow eased and her expression grew peaceful once more. Weston returned to his post by the window, troubled by his own reaction. This mission had just become considerably more complicated than he had anticipated. The afternoon passed slowly, the heat building inside the cabin despite the breeze that occasionally whispered through the gaps in the walls. Weston finally woke Katherine when the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Time to get ready, he said, offering her the canteen. We should leave soon if we want to reach North Fork by sunset. Katherine sat up, brushing hair from her face. I slept longer than I intended. You should have woken me earlier to take your turn. I'm fine, Weston assured her, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. Been in worse situations with less sleep. As they prepared to depart, Katherine noticed Weston checking and rechecking his revolver, his expression unusually tense. What's wrong? She asked, pausing in the act of retying her hair. Weston hesitated, then admitted, something doesn't feel right, it's too quiet. Thornton should have men combing these hills, but we haven't seen any sign of pursuit. Maybe they're searching in the wrong direction, Katherine suggested, though she too felt a prickle of unease. Or perhaps they believe I've already fled the territory. Perhaps, Weston conceded, though he didn't sound convinced. Still, we'll approach North Fork carefully. If there's any sign of trouble, we turn back immediately. The ride to North Fork took them through increasingly rugged terrain, following game trails rather than the main roads to avoid detection. Drifter navigated the difficult paths with sure-footed confidence, though the double burden slowed their progress. As the sun touched the western mountains, they reached a vantage point overlooking the small valley where the Wilkins cabin stood. Weston drew rein, studying the scene below through narrowed eyes. The cabin appeared undisturbed, no smoke rising from its chimney, no horses visible nearby. The surrounding woods were still, with only the occasional bird call breaking the silence. "Looks clear," Katherine murmured. "Sarah should be arriving soon." Weston wasn't satisfied. "Let's wait and watch a bit longer. If this is a trap, they'll give themselves away eventually." They dismounted, leading Drifter into a dense thicket where the horse would be hidden from view. Then they settled among the rocks, their vantage point offering a clear view of the cabin and the approach from Miller's Crossing. The minutes stretched into an hour with no sign of Sarah or anyone else. The sun had disappeared behind the mountains, and twilight was deepening into night when they finally spotted a solitary figure approaching along the path from Miller's Crossing. "That's Sarah," Katherine whispered, recognizing her friend's slender form and the distinctive blue shawl she often wore. The schoolteacher moved cautiously, frequently glancing over her shoulder as she approached the cabin. When she reached it, she paused outside the door, looking around uncertainly. "She's alone," Weston confirmed after scanning the surroundings once more. "Let's go down." They made their way carefully down the slope, keeping to the shadows. When they were within calling distance, Katherine softly called out, "Sarah." The schoolteacher's head snapped up, relief washing over her features as she spotted them. "Katherine, thank goodness. I was beginning to think you weren't coming." As they reached the cabin, Sarah embraced Katherine quickly, then reached into her shawl to withdraw a leather pouch. "Everything's here, all the documents, just as you left them." Katherine took the pouch, clutching it tightly. "Thank you, Sarah. You've taken a terrible risk." "Worth it if it means bringing Thornton to justice," Sarah replied firmly. "But you need to know things in town have gotten worse. Thornton is furious. He's offering $500 for information on your whereabouts and $1,000 for the man who helped you escape." Weston whistled softly. "That's a lot of money in these parts." "It gets worse," Sarah continued, her voice dropping. "He's threatened to burn down the Chronicle office if you don't return within 3 days, says he'll make an example of anyone who dares to challenge him." Katherine's face paled. "The Chronicle is all I have left of my father." "Which is exactly why Thornton is targeting it," Weston said grimly. "He knows it matters to you." "We need to get these documents to the marshal immediately," Katherine said, her voice strengthening with resolve. Once he seized the evidence, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the cabin, and Weston's hand flew to his revolver. "Inside, both of you, now." They barely made it through the cabin door when the first shot rang out, splintering the wood frame inches from Weston's head. He shoved the women toward the back of the small room, then dropped to one knee beside the window, peering cautiously out into the darkness. "How many?" Katherine whispered, her face tense but composed. "Can't tell," Weston replied, squinting into the deepening shadows. "At least 3, maybe more." "Zachariah," a voice called from the darkness. "We know you're in there with the Blackwell woman. Send her out and maybe we'll let you live." "Cooper," Katherine breathed, recognizing the voice of Thornton's right-hand man. "How did they find us?" Sarah's face crumpled with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Katherine. They must have followed me. I thought I was being careful, but it's not your fault," Katherine assured her, squeezing her friend's hand. "Thornton has eyes everywhere." Weston's mind raced, assessing their options. The cabin offered minimal protection. The walls were thin, the door flimsy. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with Cooper and his men able to surround them completely. "Is there another way out?" he asked, glancing around the cabin's interior. Sarah shook her head. "Just the door and windows." "Time's running out, Zachariah," Cooper called again. "Send out the women and we'll let you ride away. This isn't your fight." Weston met Katherine's gaze across the dark cabin. "He's lying. They can't afford to let any of us reach the marshal." Katherine nodded, her face set with determination. "What's our play?" Weston was struck by her courage, no hysterics, no pleas for rescue, just a clear-eyed assessment of their predicament and a willingness to fight. "We need a diversion," he said, checking the ammunition in his revolver. "Something to draw their attention while we make a break for it." Sarah looked around the cabin, then pointed to a small stove in the corner. "What about fire? The roof is mostly straw and old wood, it would catch quickly." "And provide both light and confusion," Weston nodded, approving the plan. "Good thinking, Miss Miller." Working quickly, they gathered what combustible materials they could find: old papers, broken furniture, dried grass that had blown in through the damaged roof. Weston arranged it all in the stove, then used his flint to light it. "When I give the word," he instructed, "we'll set the roof ablaze, then make a run for the trees to the east. Stay low, stay together, and don't stop for anything." "Understood." Both women nodded, their faces reflecting the growing firelight. "Cooper," Weston called out, "we're sending someone out." "Hold your fire." There was a moment of silence, then Cooper's suspicious reply, "Send them out slowly, hands where we can see them." Weston used the distraction to take a burning brand from the stove and thrust it up through a gap in the roof. The dry straw caught immediately, flames racing across the roof with startling speed. "Now," Weston shouted, kicking open the door and firing 2 quick shots into the darkness. The men outside, momentarily distracted by the sudden blaze, were slow to respond. Katherine grabbed the leather pouch of evidence, and they burst from the cabin, running low and fast toward the tree line. Bullets whizzed past them, thudding into the ground and splintering tree trunks, but the confusion of the fire and the gathering darkness worked in their favor. They reached the trees just as the cabin's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning debris. The sudden increase in light illuminated the clearing, revealing Cooper and 4 other men scrambling to reposition themselves. "Keep moving," Weston urged, guiding the women deeper into the forest. "They'll be right behind us." They ran until their lungs burned and their legs threatened to give out, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant behind them. When they finally paused to catch their breath in a small ravine, Sarah slumped against a boulder, her face pale with exhaustion. "I can't." "Go much further," she gasped, clutching her side. Katherine knelt beside her friend, concern etched on her face. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Weston scanned their surroundings, thinking quickly, "Miller's Crossing is closest." "Is there someone there you trust, someone who could hide Sarah while we continue to Tucson?" Katherine nodded. "The doctor, Emerson. He's treated my father's patients for years. He has no love for Thornton." "Then that's our destination," Weston decided. "But first, we need to find Drifter and get off this mountain before Cooper and his men regroup." It took nearly an hour of careful backtracking to locate Weston's horse, still hidden in the thicket where they had left him. The animal nickered softly in greeting, seemingly unaffected by the distant sounds of men shouting and the orange glow of the burning cabin. "Good boy," Weston murmured, patting the horse's neck before helping Sarah and then Katherine into the saddle. There was barely room for all 3, but Drifter was strong and the need urgent. They followed game trails down the mountainside, moving as quickly as they dared in the darkness. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit continued. Though more distant now, Cooper's men were experienced trackers, but even they were hampered by the night. As they neared Miller's Crossing, a small settlement consisting of little more than a general store, a livery stable, and a scattering of houses, Weston's tension eased slightly. The lights of the town offered the promise of safety, or at least witnesses who might discourage further violence. Dr. Emerson's house stood at the edge of town, a modest 2-story structure with a small sign indicating his practice. Despite the late hour, a lamp still burned in one of the downstairs windows. Weston helped the women dismount, then approached the door cautiously, his hand near his revolver. He knocked softly, and after a moment they heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal an elderly man with kind eyes and a shock of white hair. He peered at them through spectacles, surprise evident on his weathered face. Katherine Blackwell. "What in heaven's name?" His gaze took in her bruised face, then shifted to Sarah's exhausted form and Weston's vigilant stance. "Come in, quickly." Once inside, with the door locked and curtains drawn, Dr. Emerson listened gravely as Katherine explained their situation, occasionally glancing at Weston with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Thornton has finally gone too far," the doctor said when she finished, shaking his head. "I always knew he was corrupt, but attempting murder and kidnapping. This can't go unanswered." "It won't," Katherine assured him, touching the leather pouch that contained their evidence. "But we need to get these documents to the territorial marshal in Tucson, and we need your help, Doctor," Weston added. "Miss Miller needs a safe place to rest, and we need another horse. Cooper and his men aren't far behind us." Dr. Emerson considered this, then nodded decisively. "Sarah can stay here. I'll say she's a patient too ill to be moved if anyone comes asking. As for a horse—" He paused, thinking. "My neighbor Jenkins has a good mare he might be willing to part with, especially if it's to help bring Thornton to justice. He lost his best grazing land to one of Thornton's schemes last year." While the doctor tended to Sarah's exhaustion and the minor cuts and bruises they had all sustained in their flight, Weston slipped out to arrange for the horse. Katherine helped Sarah settle into a guest bedroom, then rejoined Dr. Emerson in his study. "You've taken a grave risk, my dear," the elderly doctor said, pouring her a small glass of brandy. "Thornton is not a man who forgives those who cross him." Katherine accepted the glass, though she merely held it rather than drinking. "I know, but someone had to stand against him, Dr. Emerson." "My father would have done the same." "Your father was a good man," Emerson agreed, his expression softening with memory. "He would be proud of you, though perhaps concerned for your safety." He glanced toward the window, where Weston could be seen returning with a sturdy-looking bay mare. "Your companion seems capable, at least." Katherine followed his gaze, watching as Weston led the horse to where Drifter was tethered. There was an easy confidence in his movements, a quiet strength that had begun to affect her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "He is," she said softly. "I wouldn't have escaped without him." Dr. Emerson studied her face with the perceptiveness of someone who had spent decades observing human nature. "Be careful, Katherine, not just of Thornton, but of your heart as well. Men who live by the gun rarely settle in one place for long." Katherine's cheeks flushed, and she finally took a sip of the brandy to hide her reaction. "You misunderstand, Doctor. Mr. Zachariah is helping me because it's the right thing to do, not out of any personal interest." The doctor's smile was knowing but kind. "If you say so, my dear. But I've been practicing medicine long enough to recognize certain symptoms when I see them in both patients." Before Katherine could respond, Weston returned, stomping trail dust from his boots at the door. "Jenkins was more than willing to part with the mare," he reported. "Said he'd consider it a personal favor if we brought Thornton down." "How soon do you plan to leave?" Dr. Emerson asked. "As soon as possible," Weston replied. "Cooper's men will be searching every settlement within riding distance by morning. The sooner we're on the road to Tucson, the better our chances." Katherine set down her untouched brandy. "I should check on Sarah before we go." When she had left the room, Dr. Emerson fixed Weston with an appraising look. "You've taken on quite a responsibility, young man." "Seemed like the right thing to do," Weston replied with a slight shrug. "Indeed it was," the doctor agreed. "But I wonder if you fully appreciate what you've involved yourself in. Thornton's influence extends far beyond Redemption Creek. Even if you reach the marshal, there's no guarantee justice will prevail." Weston's jaw tightened. "I've seen corrupt men hide behind their power before, Doctor. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand against them to bring them down." "And sometimes it takes more than that," Emerson countered. "It takes someone willing to stay and see the fight through to the end." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "Katherine Blackwell is a remarkable young woman. She deserves someone who won't ride away when the immediate danger has passed." Weston felt a flash of irritation at the implied criticism. "With all due respect, Doctor, you don't know me." "No," Emerson agreed mildly, "but I know men like you, restless souls, always moving on to the next horizon. There's nothing wrong with that life unless you leave someone behind who's come to depend on you." Before Weston could respond, Katherine returned, her expression resolute. "Sarah's resting comfortably. She asked me to thank you again, Weston, for everything you've done. Weston nodded, acutely aware of Dr. Emerson's evaluating gaze. We should go. The night won't last forever, and we need to put as much distance between us and Cooper as possible. After gathering supplies provided by the doctor, food, water, and bandages for their various injuries, they said their goodbyes. Katherine embraced Dr. Emerson warmly. "Take care of Sarah," she urged, "and yourself. Thornton may suspect you helped us." "Don't worry about me," the elderly doctor assured her with a surprising gleam of steel in his kind eyes. "I've survived worse than Maxwell Thornton in my time. Just focus on reaching Tucson safely." Outside, Weston helped Katherine mount the bay mare, adjusting the stirrups to fit her shorter legs. The leather pouch containing their precious evidence was secured inside her jacket, close to her heart. "Have you ridden much?" he asked, noticing her slightly uncertain posture in the saddle. "Enough to manage," Katherine replied, gathering the reins with growing confidence. "My father insisted I learn, though I've always preferred words to horses." Weston swung up onto Drifter's back, checking his revolver one last time before settling the reins in his hand. "Stay close to me. If we run into trouble, follow my lead." They set out under a canopy of stars, heading southwest toward Tucson. The night was cool, a welcome relief after the heat of the day, and for a time they rode in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Katherine who finally broke the silence, her voice barely audible above the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. "Why did you really help me, Weston? The truth this time?" Weston glanced over at her, surprised by the directness of the question. In the pale moonlight, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes reflecting the stars, she looked both vulnerable and indomitable, a contradiction that stirred something deep within him. "I told you I don't like bullies," he began, then sighed, deciding she deserved more than a partial truth. "But there's more to it than that. You reminded me of my sister, Emma. She had that same fire, that same refusal to back down from what she believed was right." "You mentioned her before," Katherine said softly. "What happened to her?" "Consumption took her 5 years ago," Weston replied, the old grief still evident in his voice. "She was all the family I had left after our parents died. After she was gone, there didn't seem much point in staying in one place anymore." Katherine was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's hard, losing the people who anchor you to the world." "It is," Weston agreed, struck by the simple eloquence of her words. "But sometimes you find new anchors when you least expect them." Their eyes met across the space between their horses, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits drawn together by circumstance, but connected by something deeper. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable in the quiet night. Weston reined in sharply, his hand moving to his revolver as he turned to listen. "Riders," he said tersely. "Coming fast from the north." "Cooper?" Katherine asked, her face tense in the moonlight. "Possibly, or just travelers in a hurry." Weston scanned their surroundings, looking for cover. "Either way, we can't take chances. This way." He led them off the trail into a dense thicket of mesquite and scrub oak, the horses picking their way carefully through the undergrowth. They found a small hollow where they could observe the trail without being seen, and dismounted to wait. The approaching riders came into view minutes later, 4 men riding hard, their faces set with purpose. Even in the dim light, Weston recognized Cooper leading them, his distinctive hat visible at the front of the group. "It's them," he whispered, easing Katherine deeper into the shadows. "They must have found someone in Miller's Crossing who saw us leaving." They held their breath as the riders passed their hiding place, continuing down the trail toward Tucson. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded into the distance did Weston relax slightly. "They're heading the same way we are," he observed grimly. "They know we're bound for the Marshal." Katherine's face was pale but determined. "Then we need to find another route." Weston considered their options. "There's a rancher's road that branches off about 5 miles ahead. It's rougher terrain, but it eventually connects with the Tucson Road from the west. Cooper and his men might not think to watch it." They mounted again and continued with greater caution, staying off the main trail and moving as quietly as possible. The night deepened around them, the moon casting long shadows across the desert landscape as they rode. Despite the danger, Katherine found herself increasingly aware of the man riding beside her. In the 2 days since he had rescued her from Thornton's shack, Weston Zachariah had proven himself to be not just brave but thoughtful, resourceful, and unexpectedly gentle. He was unlike any man she had known in Redemption Creek. There was a depth to him, a complexity that intrigued her, and beneath it all, a loneliness that echoed her own. They reached the rancher's road just as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The path was indeed rougher, winding through rocky terrain that would be challenging in daylight and potentially treacherous in the half-light of early morning. "We'll need to slow our pace," Weston cautioned as they turned onto the narrow track. "Better to arrive late than not at all." Katherine nodded, already feeling the fatigue of the long night in her muscles. The bruises from her captivity ached, and the emotional strain of the past days was beginning to take its toll. But she refused to complain, determined to match Weston's endurance. As they navigated the difficult path, the sun rose fully, bringing with it the harsh heat of the Arizona summer. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and drink from their dwindling water supply, finding shade beneath an overhanging rock formation. "How much further to Tucson?" Katherine asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "At this pace, we'll reach it by tomorrow afternoon," Weston replied, studying the rough map Dr. Emerson had provided. "There's a small way station about 5 hours ahead where we can rest and replenish our water." Katherine leaned back against the cool rock, closing her eyes briefly. "What happens after we reach the marshal, after Thornton is arrested?" The question caught Weston off guard. He had been so focused on the immediate challenge of reaching Tucson safely that he hadn't given much thought to what would come after. "I suppose you'll rebuild your newspaper," he said slowly. "Continue your father's work." "And you?" Katherine asked, opening her eyes to look at him directly. "Will you continue tracking your fugitive, move on to the next bounty?" There was something in her tone, not accusation exactly, but a quiet challenge that made Weston uncomfortable. He busied himself with checking Drifter's saddle girth, avoiding her gaze. "That's what I do," he said finally. "It's the life I chose." "Is it?" Katherine pressed gently. "Or is it just the path that seemed easiest after you lost Emma, a way to keep moving so you never have to feel rooted or vulnerable again?" Weston stiffened, surprised by her insight. "You have a way with words, Miss Blackwell." "Comes with being a newspaper woman, I suppose." "Katherine," she corrected him softly. "And yes, words are my tools. They help me understand the world and sometimes the people in it." Their eyes met, and Weston felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had been building since that first moment in Redemption Creek. It unsettled him, this feeling of being truly seen by another person after so many years of carefully maintained distance. Before he could respond, the distant sound of a gunshot shattered the quiet, followed by several more in quick succession. Both of them tensed, listening intently. "That came from ahead of us," Weston said, his hand moving to his revolver. "Near the way station, I'd guess. Cooper." Katherine asked, her momentary vulnerability replaced by alert wariness. "Possibly," Weston conceded. "Or unrelated trouble. Either way, we need to proceed with caution." They mounted and continued along the rancher's road, moving more slowly now and stopping frequently to listen. As they approached the area where they had heard the gunshots, Weston signaled for Katherine to wait while he scouted ahead. He returned 10 minutes later, his expression grim. "Stagecoach robbery. 3 men dead, the driver, a passenger, and what looks like one of the robbers. No sign of Cooper or his men." Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. "How terrible. Should we? Is there anything we can do for them?" "Nothing to be done now," Weston said, though his eyes reflected the same regret she felt. "But we can't stop here. The way station is just beyond that ridge. With luck, they'll have escaped the robbery." But as they crested the ridge, it became clear that luck was not with them. The way station, a small adobe building with a corral and water trough, showed signs of the recent violence. The door hung open, and no one came out to greet them as they approached cautiously. Weston dismounted, motioning for Katherine to stay with the horses while he investigated. She watched anxiously as he moved toward the building, his revolver drawn and his posture alert for any threat. He disappeared inside, and for several long minutes Katherine waited, her heart pounding with fear for his safety. When he finally emerged, his expression was troubled. "Station keeper's dead," he reported grimly. "Shot during the robbery, looks like no one else around." Katherine closed her eyes briefly, a prayer for the unknown man on her lips. "What do we do now? We need water and the horses need rest." "We'll take what we need and move on quickly," Weston decided. "The robbers are gone, but that doesn't mean they won't return or that Cooper won't find this place eventually." They worked efficiently, refilling their canteens from the station's well and allowing the horses to drink deeply. Inside, Weston found some preserved food that they added to their supplies. They were preparing to leave when the sound of approaching horses froze them both. "Quick, inside," Weston urged, helping Katherine dismount and leading both horses to the shelter of the station's lean-to. They slipped into the adobe building, Weston positioning himself at the window where he could observe the approaching riders without being seen. "4 men," he reported in a whisper. "Not Cooper's group, different horses, different clothing. Likely the remaining stagecoach robbers returning to divide their spoils." Katherine's face paled. "What do? We can't outrun them if they see us." Weston's mind raced through their limited options. Fighting was a last resort. He was outnumbered, and Katherine's safety was his priority. Hiding seemed the best choice, but the small station offered few concealment options. "The root cellar," he decided, spotting the trapdoor in the floor behind the counter. "Quickly." They descended into the small, earth-smelling space just as the riders reached the station. Through the cracks in the trapdoor, they could hear boots on the wooden floor above. Men's voices discussing their successful robbery and complaining about the unexpected resistance that had led to their companion's death. In the cramped confines of the cellar, Katherine and Weston were pressed together in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe. Weston's arm encircled her protectively, his revolver ready in his free hand. Katherine could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, strangely reassuring despite their precarious situation. The men above moved around the station, gathering supplies and, from the sound of it, helping themselves to the station keeper's whiskey. Their voices grew louder and more careless as they drank, their conversation turning to their plans. "We should head for Mexico," one man argued. "Too hot for us in the territory now." "Not before we collect the bounty Thornton's offering," another countered. 500 for the woman, 1,000 for the man who helped her escape. That's good money on top of what we took from the stage." Katherine tensed in Weston's arms, and he tightened his hold slightly, a silent reassurance. They were safe for the moment, as long as they remained absolutely quiet. Hours seemed to pass as they waited in the stifling darkness of the cellar. Eventually, the voices above grew fainter as the men moved outside, apparently to make camp for the night rather than continuing their journey in the dark. "We're trapped," Katherine whispered, her lips close to Weston's ear. "They'll be here until morning." "Maybe not," Weston murmured back. "They're drinking heavily. Once they pass out, we might be able to slip away unnoticed." It was well past midnight when the sounds of drunken laughter and conversation finally died down. Weston cautiously lifted the trapdoor a fraction of an inch, peering out into the station's main room. It was empty, the men having apparently moved outside to sleep. "Now's our chance," he whispered, helping Katherine up from the cellar. "We need to move silently. Follow me exactly, and if anything happens, run for the horses and don't look back." Katherine nodded, her face resolute in the dim moonlight filtering through the station's windows. They crept to the door, Weston pausing to listen before easing it open just enough for them to slip through. Outside, the 4 robbers were sprawled around a dying campfire, empty whiskey bottles scattered among them. Their horses were tethered to a hitching post near the corral, separate from where Weston had concealed their own mounts. Step by careful step, they made their way across the yard to the lean-to. The horses nickered softly in greeting, and Weston quickly quieted them with gentle hands, whispering reassurances as he and Katherine prepared to depart. They were leading the horses away from the station when disaster struck. The bay mare stepped on a dry branch, the crack seeming impossibly loud in the quiet night. One of the robbers stirred, then sat up groggily. "Who's there?" he called, reaching for his gun. "Run." Weston ordered, helping Katherine onto her horse before leaping onto Drifter's back. They kicked their mounts into a gallop just as the first shots rang out behind them. Bullets whizzed past as they raced away from the station, the shouts of the robbers fading as distance and darkness worked in their favor. Weston led them off the rancher's road into the open desert, gambling that the broken terrain and the night would make pursuit difficult. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Weston finally signaled for them to slow their pace. The horses were lathered with sweat, sides heaving from the exertion. "I think we've lost them," he said, scanning the darkness behind them, "but we've also lost the road." Katherine pushed hair from her face, her breathing still rapid from their flight. "Can you find it again?" Weston studied the star-filled sky, getting his bearings. "Yes, but we'll need to circle back eventually. For now, let's keep moving southwest. The further we get from those men, the better." They continued through the night, picking their way carefully across the desert landscape. As dawn approached, exhaustion began to take its toll on both of them. Katherine swayed in her saddle, her eyes heavy with fatigue. Weston noticed her struggle and led them toward a small arroyo where cottonwood trees offered shade and the promise of water. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he decided. "Both us and the horses need it." They dismounted in the shelter of the arroyo, the horses eagerly drinking from the small trickle of water at its bottom. Weston spread his blanket in the shade of a cottonwood, gesturing for Katherine to rest while he kept watch, but Katherine shook her head, moving to sit beside him instead. "You've been awake longer than I have," she pointed out. "You need rest too." Too exhausted to argue, Weston nodded. "We'll take turns. 2 hours each, no more. We need to reach Tucson by nightfall." Katherine agreed, settling back against the trunk of the cottonwood while Weston stretched out on the blanket nearby. Despite his intention to remain alert, the events of the past days quickly caught up with him, and he fell into a deep sleep. Katherine watched him, noting how his features softened in repose, the habitual wariness easing from his face. In sleep, he looked younger, the lines around his eyes less pronounced. She found herself wondering about the life he had led before their paths crossed, the battles he had fought, the losses he had endured, the places he had seen in his wanderings. And she wondered, with a pang that surprised her with its intensity, what would happen when their journey ended. Would he simply ride away, returning to his solitary existence as if these days together had meant nothing? The thought troubled her more than she wanted to admit. Pushing such reflections aside, Katherine focused on their surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit. But the desert remained quiet, the only sounds the soft breathing of the sleeping horses and Weston's steady respiration beside her. When it came time to wake him for his watch, Katherine found herself reluctant to disturb his rest. She reached out hesitantly, her hand hovering above his shoulder before gently shaking him. Weston woke instantly, his hand moving to his revolver before he fully registered where he was and who had awakened him. Recognition dawned and he relaxed, offering Katherine a small smile that made her heart beat faster. "Your turn," she said, her voice softer than she had intended. "I'll wake you in 2 hours." Weston nodded, his eyes lingering on her face for a moment before he sat up, stretching muscles stiff from the hard ground. "Any sign of trouble?" "None," Katherine assured him. "Everything's quiet." As she settled onto the blanket he had vacated, still warm from his body, Katherine found herself more awake than she had expected. Despite her exhaustion, her mind refused to quiet, filled with thoughts of the man sitting watch nearby and the uncertain future that awaited them both. The rest of their journey to Tucson passed without further incident, though they remained vigilant, constantly watching for signs of Cooper's men or the stagecoach robbers. They rejoined the main road late in the afternoon, the increased traffic a welcome sign that they were nearing the territorial capital. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the buildings of Tucson appeared in the distance a proper city compared to Redemption Creek, with brick buildings, busy streets, and an air of bustling commerce. "We made it," Katherine said, relief evident in her voice as they rode down the main street toward the territorial marshal's office. Weston remained tense, his eyes scanning the crowds for familiar faces. "We're not safe yet. Cooper could have men watching the marshal's office." But their arrival in Tucson proved uneventful. The territorial marshal, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Hargrove, received them in his office with cautious interest that turned to grim determination as Katherine presented the evidence she had gathered against Thornton. "This is serious business," Marshal Hargrove said, spreading the documents across his desk. "Land fraud, intimidation, suspected murder. Thornton has friends in high places, but this evidence is compelling." "Will you act on it?" Katherine asked anxiously. "He needs to be stopped before more people are hurt." Hargrove nodded, his weathered face set with resolve. "I'll issue warrants immediately for Thornton and his men, but you two should stay here in Tucson until we have them in custody. It's not safe for you to return to Redemption Creek." Katherine thought of Sarah and Dr. Emerson, worried for their safety but understanding the wisdom of the marshal's advice. "How long will it take? I'll send a detachment of deputies first thing tomorrow," Hargrove promised. "With luck, we'll have Thornton in custody within 3 days. In the meantime, I suggest you find accommodations and keep a low profile. Thornton may have reached beyond Redemption Creek for help in finding you." As they left the marshal's office, the reality of their situation began to sink in. For 3 days, they would be in limbo, their mission accomplished but the danger not yet past, and after that. "There's a decent hotel down the street," Weston said, breaking into Katherine's thoughts. "We should be able to get rooms there." The Plaza Hotel was indeed respectable, its lobby decorated with potted palms and comfortable furniture that spoke of civilization far removed from the rough frontier of Redemption Creek. The clerk raised an eyebrow at their trail-worn appearance, but was quickly mollified by Weston's payment in advance for 2 adjoining rooms. "I'll have hot water sent up for baths," the clerk offered, handing over the keys. "And would Sir and Madam be dining in the hotel restaurant this evening?" Katherine suddenly became acutely aware of her disheveled state, her dress torn and dusty from their journey, her hair a tangled mess, her face bearing the fading bruises of her captivity. "Yes, but perhaps an hour from now." In the privacy of her room, Katherine sank gratefully into the hot bath that was promptly delivered, washing away the dust and strain of the past days. The simple luxury of clean water and soap seemed almost decadent after what they had endured. As she dressed in the clean clothes provided by the hotel's laundry service, a simple blouse and skirt that were somewhat ill-fitting but infinitely preferable to her travel-stained garments, Katherine found herself considering what the future might hold. If Marshal Hargrove was successful, Thornton would face justice, and she could return to Redemption Creek to rebuild her newspaper and her life. It was what she had fought for, what she had risked her life to achieve, and yet the prospect filled her with an unexpected melancholy. Because returning to Redemption Creek almost certainly meant saying goodbye to Weston Zachariah, these thoughts were still troubling her when a soft knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Weston waiting in the hallway, similarly transformed by a bath and clean clothes. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at the nape of his neck, and he had shaved, revealing a strong jawline previously obscured by stubble. "Ready for dinner?" he asked, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "You look rested." Katherine smiled, touched by his awkward compliment. "As do you. It's amazing what a bath and clean clothes can accomplish." The hotel restaurant was modest but elegant, with white tablecloths and actual glassware luxuries that felt almost surreal after their days on the trail. They ordered steaks, both suddenly ravenous for real food after subsisting on jerky and hardtack. As they ate, Katherine found herself studying Weston across the table, noticing details she had missed in the urgency of their flight: the small scar near his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled, the surprising gentleness of his hands despite their strength and calluses. "What will you do?" she asked finally, setting down her fork. "After Thornton is arrested and it's safe to leave Tucson." Weston was silent for a moment, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I still have a fugitive to find," he said slowly. "That hasn't changed." "Of course," Katherine replied, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "You have your job to do, but after that." Weston continued, seeming to choose his words with unusual care. "I've been thinking about what comes next. I've been drifting for 5 years, Katherine. Maybe it's time I found somewhere to stop." Her heart quickened at the implication in his words, but she was afraid to hope too much. "Where would that be?" Weston's hand moved across the table to cover hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "I was thinking Redemption Creek might need a new sheriff once Thornton and his puppet Jenkins are gone. Someone who could help make it the kind of town your father envisioned." Katherine stared at him, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would stay in Redemption Creek?" "If I had a good reason to," Weston replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "Say, a newspaper editor who might be willing to take a chance on a reformed drifter." Joy bloomed in Katherine's chest, warm and unexpected. "I think she might be persuaded," she said softly. "Especially if he promised to respect the freedom of the press." Weston's smile deepened, reaching his eyes in a way that transformed his entire face. "I reckon that could be arranged." The 3 days of waiting in Tucson passed more quickly than either of them had anticipated, filled with quiet conversations over meals, walks through the city's streets, and tentative plans for a future neither had imagined before their paths crossed. With each passing hour, the connection between them deepened, built on shared experience and growing understanding. On the morning of the 4th day, Marshal Hargrove summoned them to his office, his expression satisfied as he reported the news they had been waiting for. "Thornton and his key men are in custody," he announced. "The evidence you provided was conclusive, especially once some of his men started talking to save themselves. He'll stand trial for fraud, kidnapping, and as an accessory to murder." Relief washed over Katherine, so intense that she had to grip the edge of the marshal's desk to steady herself. "And the town, is everyone all right? Your friend Miss Miller is fine," Hargrove assured her, "as is Dr. Emerson." "The Chronicle office was damaged. Thornton's men broke in looking for your evidence, but the building stands. You can begin rebuilding as soon as you return." As they left the marshal's office, stepping into the bright sunlight of a Tucson morning, Katherine felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Justice would be served, her father's memory honored, and Redemption Creek freed from Thornton's corrupt influence. But more than that, she had found something she hadn't been looking for: a partnership with a man who understood her courage and matched it with his own. "Ready to go home?" Weston asked, his hand finding hers as they walked toward the livery where Drifter and the bay mare waited. Katherine smiled up at him, squeezing his hand in response. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm ready to go home." 2 months later, Katherine stood in the newly rebuilt Chronicle office, surveying the freshly painted walls, the repaired printing press, and the neat stacks of paper waiting to be transformed into the next edition. The front page would carry the news of Maxwell Thornton's conviction and sentence, 20 years in the territorial prison for his crimes. More importantly, it would carry stories of Redemption Creek's rebirth, new businesses opening, farmers and ranchers returning to land that was rightfully theirs, and the election of a new town council committed to honest governance. And in a small announcement near the bottom of the page, news of another sort: the engagement of Chronicle editor Katherine Blackwell to the town's new sheriff, Weston Zachariah. As if summoned by her thoughts, the door opened and Weston entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He moved to her side, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture that had become beautifully familiar over the past weeks. Latest edition ready to go? He asked, glancing at the type she had been setting. Almost, Katherine replied, leaning into his embrace. Just finishing the announcement of the town meeting tomorrow. Weston chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. Still think it's strange to be on this side of the law. Never thought I'd be calling town meetings instead of avoiding them. Do you regret it? Katherine asked, turning to face him fully. Settling down here, taking on the badge, Weston's answer came not in words but in a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that still took her breath away. When they finally parted, his eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. Not for a moment, he assured her. Turns out what I was looking for all those years on the trail was right here, waiting for me to find her. Katherine smiled, remembering the shack where she had been imprisoned and the man who had torn down its walls to save her. In doing so, he had also dismantled the barriers around his own heart, finding a home he hadn't known he was seeking. I'm glad you found me, she whispered against his lips, and even gladder that you stayed. Outside the Chronicle office, Redemption Creek continued its daily rhythm, a town reborn through courage, justice, and the power of truth. And within its walls, two people who had once been adrift had found in each other the anchor they both needed, a love built on respect, forged in adversity, and promising a future brighter than either had dared to imagine. As the setting sun cast long shadows through the office windows, Katherine and Weston stood together, no longer a rescuer and the rescued, but equal partners in the life they were building word by word, day by day, in the heart of the wild frontier they now called home.